God has indeed blessed or is blessing Africa and lifted or is lifting her spirit, dignity, or glory high up. God has heard or is hearing our prayers. God has blessed or is blessing us, we, the children or family of Africa. God has protected or is protecting our nation and banished or is banishing all hardships or intervened or is intervening to end all conflicts. God protected or is protecting us. God protected or is protecting our nation. God protected or is protecting South Africa. South Africa, from the blue of our skies, from the depths of our sea, over our everlasting mountains, where the cliff give answer, sound the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and enjoy freedom in the universe, our home. The reality that we find ourselves is such that Captain Zimasa Mabela is the officer commanding of the terms honor, dignity, courage, loyalty, integrity, discipline, and pride. She understands it to be true that there is a common South African citizenship in which all citizens are equally entitled to the rights, privileges, and benefits of citizenship and equally subject to the duties and responsibilities of citizenship. And national legislation does provide for the acquisition, loss, and restoration of citizenship. The captain understands that I am a citizen of the Republic of South Africa. And it is such that I come to you first as a citizen, before any other things. Help first a citizen as a captain in the South African Navy and the officer commanding of the South African Naval College, where the highest discipline of the land comes from. To understand the reality that the defense force must be structured and managed as a disciplined military force. The primary object of the defense force is to defend and protect the Republic, its territorial integrity, and its people in accordance with this constitution and the principle of international law regulating the use of force. Captain Zimasa Mabela, it is the honest truth that diligent performance of obligation is in terms of section 237, which mandates that all constitutional obligations must be performed diligently and without delay. I have written a letter personal to you on the 27th of September 2023, which reads as follows: that good day, officer commanding South African Naval College, Captain Zimasa Mabela, Makatesi. I have come to the heritage of all officers in the South African Navy to rebalance and reorganize the Defense Force as a foundation for future growth, to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. It is the law of the land for all members of the Defense Force to act, to be taught to act, and required to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law, including customary international law governing the use of force, as obligated in terms of Section 1995 of the Constitution and the law at Section 14I of the Defense Act, delineating the functions of the Chief of the Defense Force and his or her responsibility for the training of members of the Defense Force to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law. Please agree with me and all people in the universe, our home, that in terms of Section 3 of the Constitution, There is a common citizenship in which all citizens are equally entitled to the rights, privileges, and benefits of citizenship, and equally subject to the duties and responsibilities of citizenship. It is true and correct that as a citizen with a duty in terms of Section 3 of the Constitution, I could not sit and do nothing while our country and its people are forced to live and struggle, strive, or attempt for freedom in South Africa, our land. While the supreme law of the land at Section 9.2 imposes an obligation that equality includes the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. It is inconsistent with the supreme law with the supreme law and the rule of the it is inconsistent with the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law to live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land, when the state has a duty as obligated in terms of Section 7.2 of the Constitution to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. Since all members of the Defence Force are obligated in terms of Section 1996 of the Constitution and the law at Section 2E of the Defence Act not to obey a manifestly illegal order, as cemented in our Code of Conduct for uniformed members of the South African National Defence Force, it will be wrong or unbecoming to teach all midshipmen or any candidate officer to pray to God in national prayer to let them live and struggle or attempt for freedom in South Africa, our land. The People's Navy has an equal duty to the country and its people to ensure that all comply with the law of the land. As the civilians working in the judiciary are willfully and gross negligently breaching Article 6 of the Code of Judicial Conduct, not to at all times, also in relation with extrajudicial duties, comply with the law of the land. That is a link that I have shared with you as a result of the presentation that has been made in accordance with the Constitution and the law. Is the link that explains why the officer commanding the words honor, dignity, integrity, discipline, courage, loyalty, and pride must act in terms of Section 34 of the Constitution and the law at Section 101 of the Defence Act. You can only act in accordance with the Constitution and the law in service and defense of the country and its people, and with honor, dignity, courage, and integrity. Please understand that I am also the people of the country you must serve and defend from the indignity I suffer every day without my inalienable right to sufficient food and water, as obligated in terms of Section 27 of the Constitution. Captain Sen Zimasa Mabela, Section 2G of the Defence Act mandates you to respect my dignity and rights. You will do that by calling me on 0848359161 and dispatch a duty driver to collect me at my temporary residence in Cape Town. For the past 5 years, since 8 August 2018, my salary has not been paid. The DoD personal system is fed false information in that on or before 8 August 2018, I was convicted to imprisonment in terms of Section 105 of the Defense Act, while the reality is that I am and or was not on or before 8 September 2018 convicted to imprisonment in terms of Section 105 of the Defense Act. The above false evidence appearing real, fear, has caused many people to believe that I am not a man, a human being with fundamental human rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. It is indeed true that all constitutional obligations must be performed diligently and without delay as obligated at Section 237 of the Constitution. Please do not come to work every day only to make sure that Lieutenant Commander Sylvester Volane Mangolele is not treated in accordance with the Constitution and the law as the Minister of Defense, the Secretary for Defense, the Chief of Defense, the Chief of the People's Navy, Flag Officer Fleet, and all people expect you to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law. There is nowhere in the law that a senior officer must be tortured, treated, or punished in a cruel, inhumane, and degrading way as Lieutenant Commander Sylvester Volane Mangolele has been treated. I have been forced to live a lie while others are forced to stay away from me by people who are a decline in critical capabilities. A decline is any person who refuses to uphold the Constitution as the supreme law and make another person the supreme law, while the Section 9(1) of the Constitution imposes an obligation that everyone is equal before the law and has a right to equal protection and benefit of the law. According to our officer commanding Captain Sen George Mpafi, who retired as Rear Admiral, if you argue based on policy, you win. Remembering them who have the rule over you, who have spoken unto you the word of God, whose faith follow conversations, considering the end of their conversations, as it is written in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 17. Lieutenant Commander Sylvester Volane Mangolele has opened also their ear to discipline and commandeth that they return from iniquity, as it is written at Job 36 verse 10. And I have signed this letter on 27 September 2023 before the officer of the day in Gordons Bay. It is indeed true that South Africa is our responsibility, is a country that we serve and defend. That's why I'm calling upon Captain Sen Zimasa Mabela to let us live and enjoy freedom in the universe, our home. Papa Oteng. It is like that diverse people unite. Training is what makes me smile, as you can see in that particular picture. And the reality of that particular smile is that which you must teach the young ones that are coming from this particular road that all officers in the Navy come from. Captain Sen Zimasa Mabela, the only reason you have not called me on 084-835-9161 and arranged for the duty driver to pick me up for our meeting at SA Naval College in Gordons Bay in terms of Section 34 of the Constitution and the law at Section 101 of the Defense Force is simply because that you do not have the freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion that we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representative, adopt this constitution as the supreme law of the Republic so as to heal the division of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay a foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person and build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. May God protect our people. Nkosi sikeleli Africa, morena boloka setšhaba sa yeso, God sien South Africa, God bless South Africa, Mudzimu futusetsa Africa, Osi katekisa Africa. This is the beginning part of our constitution, as you can see. This is the constitution, the law that we are following, the law that is our manual, the law that we act in accordance with. It is what you must understand, that I am not saying things that are out of the context of the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law, but I am telling you things that are in the Constitution. And this is the beginning part of the Constitution. I just only made it simple for you to see it. It is like that. To regulate financial management in the national government and provincial governments, to ensure that all revenue, expenditure, assets, and liabilities of those governments are managed efficiently and effectively, to provide for the responsibilities of persons entrusted with financial management in those governments, and to provide for matters connected therewith. The Act of Public Finance Management Act was established, and its object is to secure transparency, accountability, and sound management of the revenue, expenditure, assets, and liabilities of the institution to which it applies. And in securing transparency, I want you to understand that the reality that to repeal the Broadcasting Act of 1976 so as to establish a new broadcasting policy for the Republic, to amend certain provisions of the Independent Broadcasting Authority, to clarify the powers of the minister in regard to policy formulation. You will understand it to be true that we acknowledge that South African broadcasting services are owned and controlled by South Africans. And it is the reality of the law of the land that basic principles and of governing public administration are such that public administration must be governed by the democratic values and principles enshrined in the Constitution, including the principle that transparency must be fostered by providing the public with timely, accessible, and accurate information. This is merely what the law of the land dictates. And all that I am asking you as the officer commanding of South African Naval College is to follow this law. You are not breaking the law by inviting the media house to come and then record our conversation in terms of Section 34 of the Constitution and the law at Section 101 of the Defense Act, for the people to know that what you and I are talking about is only the law. And we call upon all people that wants to defend such, or that wants to tell you that do not follow this law, to come and show cause in that open, transparent environment where we fulfill this particular constitutional obligation at Section 1951G of the Constitution. Unnecessary expense, fraud, and etc. is in terms of section 020905 at chapter 2 of St. GP 1 Delta, which obligates every officer, warrant officer, and rating is strictly enjoined to avoid all unnecessary public expense and so far as may depend upon him to prevent it in others. It is policy that every officer, warrant officer, and rating is to report any neglect, collusion, or fraud which he or she may discover or know if of in any contractor, agent, or person concerned in supplying stores or provisions or in executing any naval works either ashore or afloat. To provide for the defense of the Republic and for matters connected therewith, we have the Defense Act of 2002, which at section 104.11 imposes an obligation that any person who induces or attempts to induce any member of the defense force to neglect or to act in conflict with his or her duty to the defense force is guilty of an offense and liable on conviction to a fine or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. And at section 104.10, it imposes an obligation that any person who obstructs or interferes with the defense force in the execution of its duties in terms of this act or the Constitution is guilty of an offense and liable on conviction to a fine or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 25 years. Captain Mabela, the reality is such that for as long as you continue not to call me, you will understand that you are forcing the defense force not to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law. And such will require you to hand over yourself to the police and say, please, to uphold this law in the Defense Act, send me to jail for 25 years. Because that is what we must do to all people in the defense force who are inducing me to neglect my children, to neglect my property, to neglect my rights, to neglect my duty to my country and its people in accordance with the Constitution and the law, and to cause me not to act in accordance with the principles that are enshrined in the Constitution and the rule of law. You will understand it to be true that establishment, structuring, and conduct of security services is such that security services must act and must teach and require their members to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law, including customary international law and international agreements binding on the Republic, as enshrined in terms of Section 1995 of the Constitution. And at Section 1996, it is written that no member of any security service may obey a manifestly illegal order. So if a person comes and tells you, no, do not obey what Mangolele is telling you, he's simply telling you that do not obey the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. And understand it to be true that political activities are such that officers, warrant officers, and ratings of the South African Navy are not to institute or take part in any meetings, demonstrations, or processions for party or political purposes. Under no circumstances whatever are they to attend such meetings wherever held in uniform. They may attend public political meetings in public clothes, but this and the registration of their votes represent the full extent of their political activities. Functions of the Chief of the Navy, of the Chief of Defense Force are such that without derogating from any function of the Secretary for Defense contemplated in Section 8, the Chief of the Defense Force is responsible for the training of members of the Defense Force to act in accordance with the Constitution and the law, including customary international law and international agreements binding on the Republic. So if the Chief of the Defense Force tells you, no, do not help Mangolele, do not attend to Mangolele in accordance with the Constitution and the law, that particular Chief of the Defense Force is in direct violation with his own duty, as it is written at Section 14 of the Defense Act. So understand it to be true that no other person from above will tell you, do not, hoya umangolele, ye kalento, All I am asking you is to obey the law and teach all the midshipmen and any candidate officer or all officers to obey the law and its supremacy. For all that I am giving you is that you will understand that the Chief of Defense Force must manage the defense as a disciplined military force, and the defense force is such that it's structured and managed as a disciplined military force. That's where the chief derives this particular duty to manage, because we only act in accordance with the Constitution. This is what the Constitution is saying. This is what the law is saying, and this is what we must do, because our primary object as the defense force is to defend and protect the republic. That's why we don't have business in politics. And it is true that the Chief of Defense Force is responsible for the development of a non-racial, non-sexist, and non-discriminatory institutional culture within the Defense Force in accordance with the Constitution and departmental policy on equal opportunity and affirmative action. So the Chief of Defense Force cannot come and tell you, don't help Mangolele. It will be you obeying a manifestly illegal order. That is the truth, because the Chief of Defense Force must function in accordance with these applicable terms. The misconduct of commissioned officers is to be treated in terms of the Defense Act, which you've just seen now, the Military Discipline Code, common law, and or other applicable statute. That you find at Chapter 2 at Section 0915. Officer Commanding South African Naval College, Captain Zimasa Mabela, you are called in function to provide quality naval officers through dynamic training. This is not personal. It is only function of the officer commanding the heritage of all naval officers in the words honor, dignity, courage, discipline, integrity, loyalty, and pride. These are the words that are on the starboard roadway. These are the words that we shined every day as midshipmen, you and myself, when we were in the same class, Captain Mabela. You were called Makatesi at the time. You will understand it to be true that as I did in 2003, I left my ancestral home in Mopogelo to Cape Town in Gordons Bay to serve and defend my country and its people in accordance with the Constitution and the law, with honor, dignity, courage, and integrity. Integrity is something of a fuzzy word, so let me tell you my definition. People with integrity tell the truth and they keep their word. They take responsibility for past actions, admit mistakes, and fix them. They know the laws of their country, industry, and company, both in letter and spirit, and abide by them. They play to win the right way by the rules. That is as written on the book called Winning, published by HarperCollins in page 83. Integrity in our Navy includes the code, morality, trust, virtue, business, reliability, principles, ethics, truth, culture, and sincerity. This is what drives our Navy. You will understand it to be true that the rights are such that this Bill of Rights is a cornerstone of democracy in South Africa, and it enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. And you work for the state, Captain Mabela. The state must indeed respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. So you will not be wrong by helping Mangolele achieve all these particular rights, as it is your duty. And fundamental to all my rights is healthcare, food, water, and social security. And the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. in that everyone has the right to have access to healthcare services, including reproductive health care, sufficient food and water, social security, including, if they are unable to support themselves and their dependents, appropriate social assistance. And no one may be refused emergency medical treatment. It is the law of the land. It is the law that we must protect with our very own lives. For you are responsible as a captain to promote the welfare and spiritual well-being of the personnel under your command and endeavors to maintain them in a satisfactory state of health and physical fitness. Without food, I have no morale. The captain is responsible for the maintenance of high standard of morale. He or she should at all times endeavor to limit irritating orders and routines and petty restrictions whenever that can be done without detriment to the efficiency of the ship. The captain must maintain a high standard of discipline and a healthy tone between officers and ratings. Encourage competitive spirit and esprit de corps on board and vital interest in the service and the ship. The captain must ensure that noteworthy performance or devotion to duty receives timely and appropriate recognition. Must discover and use the talents of the various individuals on board to encourage industry and organize recreation and entertainment. It is indeed true that I do work, and I only ask you to follow the policies and GP1 Delta. That is where you will find this definition of morale and the duty for the captain. It is all that I ask you to do. For all that must be done is for these terms to be applicable and come true to everyone in the country, to everyone in the military, to everyone in the universe. Because divisional officers have authority, that the divisional officers is to have authority over the men, women, and his or her division, and is to be responsible under the senior officer of the department and the executive officer for their discipline, training, and welfare, including the encouragement and supervision of games, sports, and other forms of recreation. Advise he or she is to keep in close touch with his or her personnel and should be ready at all times to advise and help them to the best of his or her abilities. Knowledge of personnel, he or she is to know all he or she can about his or her personnel, both their personal background and nature and performance of their duties. Written reports, he or she is responsible for the writing of reports on his or her personnel to provide a comprehensive picture of them for the information and guidance with respect to merit assessment, promotion, boards, and for subsequent divisional officers. Captain Mabela, you are the divisional officer of the words on the wall. That is why I am telling you these duties of a divisional officer. You are the divisional officer of the words courage, discipline, honor, dignity, integrity, loyalty, and pride. And training is such that he or she is to pay particular attention to the training in divisional duties of the junior officers, warrant officers, senior ratings, and junior ratings who are placed under his or her authority. They are to be given the fullest possible responsibility in charge of the men or women within the divisional system, commensurate with their level of experience. He or she is, by his or her example, to instill into them the necessity for firmness, tact, and sympathy, coupled with unswerving fairness and unsavoring fairness in all their dealings with subordinates, and he or she is to be careful to check any tendency which he or she may observe in them to undue harassment or irritating language. Discipline is such that he or she is to uphold the authority of the senior rating, being on the alert to see that they do their duty impartially and courageously, and bringing to notice any who stand out prominently as leaders or who fail in this respect by reason of unsatisfactory qualities or habits. He or she is to ensure that all the officers, warrant officers, chief petty officers, and leading ratings of his or her divisions are fully acquainted with their duty to preserve order and to keep themselves informed of any cause of complaint or dissatisfaction among the men or women. He or she is to read and comply with section 3 of this chapter on quarantine and customs. It is the truth that discipline is in terms of section 9 of St. GP1 Delta, and in general acquaintance with portions of the military discipline code. Captains are to ensure that every rating is acquainted with sections of the military discipline code which lay down all the punishable offenses which may be dealt with under military law. The provisions of these sections are from time to time to be explained to the rating and particularly to new entries so as to preclude the possibility of ignorance on their part of the additional offenses and punishment to which a rating renders him or herself by becoming subject to military law. Maintenance of good order is in terms of section 0902, which is such that it is the duty of every officer and non-commissioned officer to ensure that order and regularity are preserved in his or her vicinity among those officers, warrant officers and ratings of whatever branch and whether they are on duty or not, who are junior to him or her in rank. Conduct to be observed is such that all officers, warrant officers, and ratings are to conduct themselves with the utmost respect of their superior officers and with strict obedience to their orders. They are at all times to discharge every part of their duty with zeal and alacrity, and so far as circumstances permit, to assist all officers and non-commissioned officers in the duties they have to perform. They should on all occasions strive to promote the welfare of the naval service and by the good order and regularity of their conduct show an example to those who may be subject to their command. All officers and women are to discourage and endeavor to repress all cursing, swearing, drunkenness, and poor conduct. They are to abstain from gaming, rioting, quarreling, and from abusive and irritative language, especially to inferiors, and are at all times to exert their influence against all that tends to the disparagement of religion and the encouragement of vice and immorality. Remarks on criticism from superiors. No officer, warrant officer, or rating is to make any remark or any criticism which may tend to bring his or her superior into contempt. No officer, warrant officer, or rating is to say or do anything which, if heard or seen by or reported to those under him or her, might discourage them or make them dissatisfied with their condition or with the service on which they are or may be employed. It is indeed true that I have worked to do this particular presentation and bring it to you such that you understand my plea to you. I expect you to call me on 0848359161 and expect you to ensure that everything that is mine comes back to me. First, beginning with my children, my property, and all that I have lost as a result of an act or omission by the training or service under the Defense Act. God has indeed blessed Africa. Papa Ote.